the genesis of each idea is usually like a lot of times just like a sort of sequence of chords that like the way in which one runs into the other, like, you know, from a harmonic standpoint is, I don't know, it makes me feel something.
Trevor Edmonds is a multi-instrumentalist from Bay City, Michigan, who utilizes unique sound samplings, loops, and mixes these sonic elements to create his songs. In our conversation today, learn more about his approach and plan on seeing him perform live at the Saginaw Art Museum as part of our Museum Tunes concert series on August 1st. Trevor, thank you so much for joining me here on the Temple Arts podcast. We are looking forward to hearing your music in the beautiful Saginaw Art Museum gardens for our Museum Tunes concert coming up in August, which isn't too far away. But I wanted to learn a little bit more about your music, the process that you go through making your music, and some of the thought behind it. One thing that I've noticed is that what I've heard anyway is very instrumental and cinematic, almost in a way where you're creating, I don't know, in my own mind, it's evoking some imagery. I'm curious if you can speak to that a little bit. Is that a sort of conscientious process that you're leaving words out, or what is it behind the instrumentation that draws you, or why do you work in that way?
Well, no, I think that's like a really good observation about a lot of the stuff that I'm doing, especially like in regards to a lot of the like solo work that I'm recording, or that I have recorded over the years. I think a lot of it in some ways is because in other different music projects I've been involved in the past, like, you know, I guess you could say like in bands, a lot of those were more, song-based endeavors, I guess you could say, where whether it was myself or another member of the group was singing and there were lyrics involved in the songs. There wasn't really so much in the way of instrumental music that was being created in those contexts. So when it came to working on, a lot of my own music over the years, that's kind of what I gravitated towards. And I'm not sure if that was necessarily like a direct response to just like maybe having an outlet for those ideas, like outside of the context of like a band setting. I'm sure some of it, especially early on, was maybe kind of done so out of, I guess for lack of a better word, like done so out of necessity, maybe just because I was like uncomfortable with like the sound of my voice as far as, in a singing context. I actually have some things in the works that do involve, like actual songs, like things that that are very still much in their infancy. But I've just really like, a lot of the music that I like. I do like a lot of, lyric based music, a lot of like pop music and pop bands and things like that, from various like genres of music. But I really do have an affinity for, it's interesting when you use the word cinematic, like I do like a lot of soundtrack music. And I do like a lot of groups that kind of operate within the realm of instrumental music that, draw inspiration from a lot of different types of music, whether it be like orchestral music or, other soundtrack music or things of that nature, ambient music, as well. So I think in some ways it just allows me to, attempt to, maybe not experiment from like a overall standpoint, but like kind of experiment within myself of trying to make music in that way and seeing if I can maybe make something that's captivating, that's without words or melody that's coming from a voice. So yeah, I don't know, that's maybe a bit long-winded, but that's an approach to it, I guess.
Yeah, you mentioned this idea of the music being something of an outlet, something different than what you're doing with other bands. And on many of the tracks that I've listened to, you are playing multiple instruments, and then you're putting those instruments together and mixing it together. And I'm curious if in that process, you start with a particular instrument, or do you have the whole thing sort of in your head and you're just sort of rushing to get it all out so that and lining up the instruments, or is it a process that takes more time when you're working on trying to put a piece together?
Sure. It's well, I will say one thing that's the one sort of like general rule of thumb is like it is very much like a sort of song by song or track by track basis. A lot of times like the original or sort of like the foundation or like original concept will typically come out of I'd say like my main instruments I focus on are like guitar and piano, or keyboard based instruments. So a lot of times it'll come out of some sort of chord progression from one of those, and then to sort of get like the initial basis. And then sometimes I might, like, if it was originally devised on guitar, I might try it out, like what does it sound like on a piano or on a synthesizer, and then that'll kind of create this like base layer. And then as far as like the time on things, there's been some things I've done in fairly short order, where like it'll just be this initial idea of these different sort of, maybe like in a more like song based structure, where it's like something that's kind of evocative of a verse and then a chorus and then a bridge or something, or something wildly different from that. And then I'll just start adding in, like, well, maybe I want something that's like, a bass guitar, or something that's, like kind of representing those frequencies as far as like the overall piece. And then there will become like more melodic elements that'll layer. And there's, I don't know, a group I've liked for a long time is the French band Air. It's a electronic duo, and I've always really enjoyed the way that they've approached music from that way, where it's using a lot of these like electronic and sometimes acoustic instruments, but it has this very sort of like arranged, almost like orchestral feel, where there's like things that come in and out a lot, like where it's not like, maybe thinking of like a 4-piece band where everyone's doing something like the whole time, where there's always drums, there's always guitar, there's always bass, and maybe like something else. Like things come and go, and like there might just be like one phrase that's played on one instrument, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like it doesn't have to like have its presence be felt the entire time. Like you can just kind of drop in quickly and then drop out, just to add a different color to the overall picture. So yeah, each thing's a little bit different, but normally like there is like the genesis of each idea is usually like a lot of times just like a sort of sequence of chords that, like, the way in which one runs into the other, like from a harmonic standpoint, is, I don't know, it makes me feel something in a certain way. So
Yeah, it's interesting because as I listen to it, it sounds almost unrehearsed, not like it's bad, but more like it's improvised
yeah.
in a way, and not unrehearsed like you don't know what you're doing. But I think improvised is probably the more proper term, but not improvised like jazz is improvised, but improvised in the sense of what goes together here, and like I can follow it as a whole, but
Yeah.
almost like you take the listener on a journey of sorts.
Yeah, and I think that's a good observation, because a lot of times that really can be the case, where it's like what I was like talking about, like I would, maybe record like these, like a guitar or a keyboard or something doing like this chord progression or something, and then in order to start coming up with like additional things to layer on it, I'll just kind of have that going in the background and be playing things on top of it. And sometimes it's like it very much is like like an improvisational thing, where it's like you're just sort of like noodling on top of it to like come up with something that sounds appealing. And then sometimes it's one of those things where like the first thing you do on top of it is what you want, or it might be the 13th thing you do on top of it. But yeah, sometimes it's just like, I guess and then when those moments happen where it's like the very first thing you do on top of it just feels right and you don't want to mess with it, it's kind of like like I'm a big Neil Young fan, and like he kind of has this philosophy sometimes where it's like, especially when you're recording, like, maybe not so much like in my context, where it's like I'm kind of like a one-man thing as far as my music goes, where it's like I'm just kind of like multi-tracking stuff, but like sort of like that approach where it's like the tape or the hard drive is rolling, whatever the case may be, and you're just like letting it flow out. And sometimes like you just get something right off the bat that is unrehearsed, that's just, it just comes out of you. And it's like, well, even if there was like, even like if there's like a little bit of a flub with it, it just still has that like feeling that's hard to replicate at times. So it's and it's hard to recreate it. So you just sort of you stick with it, and you accept it as a document of where that piece was at that point in time. And it's like, it can certainly morph in the future, like in a live context. But as far as this song was concerned at that point in time when I was recording it, it's like that's the best document of it at that point. So I'll roll with that.
Yeah, it's interesting because with the ability to have multiple takes as you're recording, it's sort of refreshing to consider what happens when you don't take advantage of all of the potential opportunity there to try and create perfection, right? Where
Yeah.
you can keep trying it over and over again. Maybe it sounds different or even better at the time, but it's never exactly replicated.
Yeah, and that's sort of like, and I know this sort of like philosophy or idea, like, extends to a lot of different like technologies, but like that's sort of that can be one of the pitfalls of making music with a lot of things that are really convenient for us to use now, excuse me, is that almost knowing when to stop is, as much of a talent or an acquired ability compared to a lot of things. Because like with all these different softwares that are relatively affordable, and if people are prone to using plugins or these different things, like depending on what people want to use, I mean, there's just so many variables, and it's just so easy to do things nowadays, compared to like some of the processes that like studios or people recording records at home were doing, like 10, 20, let's say 30 years ago, just like how hard it would be to do certain things. Whereas now it's like you can do it with, like the toggle of a switch and like an interface. So knowing when to stop and when to like draw the lines is, as much of an ability or thing to recognize as, maybe like knowing something about, like music theory or something, or like how when certain chords go together, it may make you feel a certain way. So it's yeah, it's definitely like a thing to and I by no means am I saying that I have acquired that, but it's something to always I guess sort of strive for, because it's like you could just spend endless amounts of time like tweaking things and you'll never like be satisfied. So like kind of knowing when something's done or it feels done, and then putting it to rest and putting it out there or calling it good, whatever you're going to do, is certainly a good thing to be able to arrive at.
Yeah, do you find that in that editing process that that you enjoy some of that journey of like trying to figure out where to stop, or do you find that once you have all the material and it's all on your hard drive, the editing is sort of a bit of a chore or laborious? And, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, actually, in some ways, like I really do like it, because it's almost like the thing of, if you're almost looking at, especially with, like recording with a computer, I mean, it can, in some ways, like depending on what you're after, like it can kind of be this very like sort of, sort of like collagey, like cut and paste approach. So, I mean, if you kind of go through this initial process of recording a bunch of different things, like, from whether they be like acoustic or electronic instruments, you have all these, well, basically what are like just files on your computer, and then you can kind of start like shifting things around and cutting them up and moving them around. So sometimes that can be really fun, like especially even if you get to a point where you're kind of done with an idea, but then if you want to like take all those elements and like, like re-edit those into like a different version or a different mix, and just seeing like what things sound like, even just like like dropping one of the tracks out for like a couple bars at a certain point, like how that can change things dynamically. So I'm certainly not averse to spending time going down those paths and seeing what can come out of it. So yeah, there can be a lot of enjoyment in that for sure. I think for me though, I mean, a lot of it, like as far as like the enjoyment of it, is like the initial like kind of like conception of the ideas, and then like what they can ultimately become is I think what sort of like keeps me doing it, like, sort of like the I guess sort of like the thing between me doing it or just be making a decision, be like, oh, I'm just gonna sell all this music equipment, like this is what am I doing? But like the fact that like those moments can just like are out there, like, and you don't know when they're gonna come about, is it's very appealing, and it definitely makes me want to keep like doing it, and like spending time doing it. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's my understanding that making music is not a full-time career for you. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true. I actually work for a nonprofit called the Saginaw Basin Land Conservancy. So that's what I do, like with as in terms of like my actual job. So like music is very much like, I guess you'd say, like a hobby. I mean, there's been times in the past when I've, especially when I've been in groups where like we were playing more regularly, and you'd, make a little bit off of it. But even in those contexts, like it was just like a bonus, like, because as far as I was concerned, whenever it came to music, like it was, whether it was doing stuff on my own or playing with people, like it was just like the act of doing it, of just making things. And then especially, and then in a band context, like the camaraderie of like having those shared experiences with people was great. And so then like whenever it came around to like people letting you play this stuff like at their venue or their bar or whatever the case would be, and then on top of that like paying you to do it, it was like, I can't believe this, like like it's almost crazy. Not like a lot of people have done it like time and time again, but just being able to have the time and the space to like to do it, like whether it was just by myself or with other people, was like reward enough. And then the thrill of coming up with things and seeing where they go. So yeah, that's always been really appealing to me. And more so it's been, as of late, like just kind of doing it on my own. But like I've just had some of the best times of my life have been, like experiencing that with other people, and just making music and playing music live has been, a great source of joy for me. So
Yeah, I think that it's interesting to consider how um, you've developed this incredible creative pursuit, but it doesn't have to be the thing that makes the ends meet. I think that there's some interesting value in your ability to maintain that level of creativity. Do you feel like having sort of, I'll call it a day job, do you feel like that contributes to the creativity and the energy that you put into your music?
I think it does, because I mean that's something I will think about from time to time, where like, like sometimes my wife and I will talk about like, the sort of like conversations you'll have, like if you had like a month off or like a year off to just do whatever, what would you do? And sometimes one of the ideas I come back to a lot is like, because I've never had a point in my life really where I like basically like wasn't working and just had like a month or like an extended period of time to do nothing but like record an album, let's say. But sometimes I'll think about that, like if I actually had like a full month off, like it was like, let's like a sabbatical or something, and that's all I was doing was just like, I get up in the morning and like my only agenda for like the day or the week is just like working on completing this recording. I've never had that experience before. So sometimes I wonder, like, if I did, how that would go, compared to like my experience as I know it, where it's like I have, my job and like other responsibilities. So it kind of makes it like, I don't know if this is like a negative view on it, but almost like where you're fitting it in around other things that you do, like other like responsibilities you have, even if they're like things you enjoy doing as well. But like if the fact that like you have limited time to do it, like makes you work more efficiently or make snap decisions about, like that thing I was talking about earlier, where it's like when you're using technology as it exists today, like where you can do so much, like where having that limited time to do it like makes you be snappier with like, this is, I like the way this sounds, this is done. And maybe I'll like revisit it in the future or make some like different version of it, but like having that like limited time to really focus on it, like in some ways, like might bring things into fruition more versus like having unlimited time to do it. But But that being said, though, like if I ever had the opportunity to like, say have like a month off or something to just like, all right, you're gonna try to like make this like 10-song album or something, and just, but then like totally starting from scratch, like what would ultimately happen if, I did that? Would I just actually do it and it'd be great, or would it be like a thing where I'd just like have so much time and I'd kind of wallow around in it and like ultimately come up with nothing? It's hard to say, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think about those things though from time to time.
Yeah, well, we're certainly looking forward to hearing your music in the garden. We hope that we can provide a neat space for that, and we're looking forward to hearing those songs, whether it's improvised or otherwise. It'll be interesting to see and to experience that. Just considering the way that you do incorporate lots of instruments and the technology and things like that.
Yeah, I really appreciate the invitation to do this, and it's making me kind of think about pulling off some of these songs in that setting, because like in some ways this music for me, like when I do it, a lot of times it's just kind of like a recording project. So when it comes to actually performing some of this stuff live, like some of the stuff I have performed live at different points in the past, but then it's like I always like to take these opportunities to sort of rethink like how I can do that differently, or like how I could, slightly adjust the arrangements to like whether it's just me or like I'm gonna have a little bit of help, like a couple friends, and like help pull off some of the stuff and like play some other stuff along with me too. But it's I always like appreciate these opportunities, especially like in like the context of like playing some, like doing this stuff at like the Saginaw Art Museum, like outdoors, like in like such a beautiful space. So I definitely don't like to just go on autopilot and do things the way I might have done in the past. Like I like to, especially like because I don't play live very often, especially solo. So like I like to look at each one of these opportunities like a way to sort of like reimagine things a little bit and experiment on that front. So thank you for providing a space for that to happen for me. I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm sure it'll be a fantastic experiment, and we'll we'll see how it all works together.
Yeah. I'm very much looking forward to it.
Thank you for listening to the Temple Arts Podcast. Please consider subscribing to the podcast and making a donation to the arts through SaginawArtMuseum.org or TempleTheater.com. This will allow us to continue to bring enriching program to Saginaw and beyond.